Let me explain. Congressman Diane Black, who's had a very, very important set of votes, is not going to be able to join us. I was hoping that she'd be able to fly in and give the summary, but unfortunately, her duties on the floor of Congress are going to keep her there. She's represented Tennessee's 6th Congressional District since 2011, and I do want to mention her, even though she's not going to be with us, because of the important work she's done as the author of the Student and Family Tax Simplification Act and as an important supporter of the Student Success Act. But we do have 3 distinguished panelists with us. Our first speaker will be Patrick Wolf. Dr. Patrick Wolf is the Distinguished Professor of Education Policy and 21st Century Endowed Chair in School Choice in the Department of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas. I could not name another scholar who has provided more intellectual firepower to the movement for school choice, and I commend to your attention his online biography and very extensive set of publications. After Dr. Wolf's presentation on the advantages of school choice, Ramesh Ponnuru will provide the important warning of the damage that regulation can do to education quality. Mr. Ponnuru is a senior editor for National Review magazine, a contributor to Time magazine, and to WashingtonPost.com. Finally, Hsiao will provide us with a hopeful vision for the future, exploring how disruptive innovation and entrepreneurship can bring us academic excellence, access, and cost effectiveness. I'd like to share with you a few slides and words by way of overview before our session begins. Our founders understood profoundly that ignorance, prosperity, and freedom do not coexist for long. I've chosen this quote from Thomas Jefferson. We could look at many, many more. And let's see, we seem to be locked here. What has happened? There we go, sorry. That's a little too small for you to see, but you know you've got problems in education when Gary Trudeau picks up the hint. Here we have the president, actually the late president of Yale University, Kingman Brewster, arguing with the dean that it really doesn't matter that students leave college unable to reason. And he said, well, who's going to care? And the dean says, well, you know, employers. And finally, in the last slide, we find Mr. Doonesbury asking some young man why he's late for work, and the young fellow explains, I got trapped in a paper bag. If anybody, by the way, wants the PowerPoint slides, just let me have your address. I'd be delighted to send them. Getting back to the serious data, the National Assessment of Adult Literacy, which was twice repeated, has some very bad news. The average high school graduate would have trouble calculating the total cost of ordering supplies from a catalog. The average four-year college graduate can't reliably compare viewpoints in newspaper editorials or compute and compare the cost per ounce of food items. And for all of this excellent education and great outcomes, our tuition costs have gone up 4.5 times the cost of inflation over the last 35 years. We outspend every other nation in the world per pupil in higher education. And when we put together kindergarten through 12th grade with higher education, we have the distinction of having the second highest expenditure per pupil in the world. The cost of ignorance, the civic cost of ignorance about which our founders warned, has become increasingly evident. That's a wonderful observation by James Madison, but let's see what really has happened within our own time. This is the result of a survey that ACT administered in 1999 to seniors from the, quote, best colleges and universities in the country. Well, 99% of our seniors knew who Beavis and Butthead were, and just about the same could identify Snoop Doggy Dogg, but alas, less than a quarter seem to know very much about James Madison. It gets worse. In our 2012 survey, we discovered that 62% of college graduates could not identify the term lengths of members of Congress. And that was a multiple choice question, by the way. They didn't have to actually come up with the right number of years. They were pretty good on Lady Gaga, however. And there is, of course, cause and effect. We do a survey of some 1,100 colleges and universities every year, and what we've discovered is that only 18% of them require a foundational course in American history or government. ACTA's annual survey of colleges and universities shows that there are howling gaps in the core skills and knowledge of our four-year college graduates. So we can talk about how much we spend on education, and we can talk about how badly we need more work in science, technology, education, engineering, and mathematics, but for all we spend, we don't have results. And employers know this. When more than a quarter of the employers surveyed say that they find the basic writing skills of four-year college graduates deficient, if there ever was a wake-up call, that has to be it. So here's our question for the panel. How can we give our great kids the great schools and the great education that they and our nation need and deserve? And with that, I introduce Dr. Patrick Wolf.
Well, thank you, Michael, for that very generous introduction. Let me get my slides up here. Mine disappeared.
No.
Let's see.
You're on the desktop.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So, as Michael alluded to, I've spent the last 17 years studying private school choice programs. And I have two summaries of the research literature, one that takes 10 minutes to present and one that takes 20 hours to present. So how many people want the 20-hour version? Okay, come see me afterwards because I want to enroll you in our elite doctoral program in education reform. If you can take that much abuse, then you're perfect for what we're looking for. All right, so what is private school choice? I define private school choice as any public policy that assists parents in enrolling their child in a private school of their choosing. Now, this includes three distinct policies, all geared toward the same objective of putting parents in charge of determining the school that their child will attend. One is government-funded school vouchers. Another is tax credit-funded scholarships that are administered by nonprofit organizations. And the third, and perhaps the most exciting form of private school choice, is education savings accounts, where the state deposits a portion of the monies that it would otherwise spend on a child in public schools into an expenditure account where parents can make purchases out of that account for things like private school tuition, tutors, therapy, et cetera, much like flexible spending accounts for medical services operate today. So those are all private school choice programs. Now, private school choice is spreading like a wave across the United States. All the states in blue and cities with stars in them are places that have private school choice programs of one of these flavors, one or more of these flavors. And you see the South in particular is becoming almost solid in that regard, but also the Midwest. There are several programs in the Northeast and in the Mountain West. So school choice, private school choice is not an isolated phenomenon. It is widespread and growing. So 22 states with 41 publicly funded private school choice programs. Now, There are several big policy questions and central to the policy debate about private school choice. And one is, does competition from choice transform the test scores of students who are left behind in public schools? Opponents of school choice often say this is going to destroy the education of the poor students left behind in public schools. There have been 23 rigorous evaluations of the effect of private school choice programs on the students who stay in the affected public schools. And you see I'm using sort of a stoplight color coding here. Red is bad, yellow is caution, and green is good. Green is go, and we see no red on this page. There are no studies indicating that students who stay in public schools perform less well as a result of competition. There's one study showing that it's a wash, and there are 22 showing that the competitive pressure of private school choice leads public schools as institutions to improve their performance and deliver higher test scores for the students who remain there. What about the effect on the test scores of students who actually participate in these programs? Well, there have been 29 results from rigorous studies of this question, and I've participated in a good number of these. And basically, again, we see no red. There's been no finding of a statistically significant negative effect of participating in a private school choice program on student test scores. There are a bunch of findings of no significant difference between the students who exercise choice and the students who stay in public schools. That's the yellow bar. And there have been 13 findings of significant positive effects. Now remember, in the previous slide we showed that when you launch private school choice programs, the public schools themselves improve, the test scores of the public school kids improve. So that's the comparison that we're making here. And in the case of the green bars, those are cases where the participants in private school choice, their gains from choice were significantly greater than the gains of the public school students who also were positively affected from the competitive pressure. So in a sense, the competitive effects of school choice are kind of at war with the participant effects in school choice, but it's all good news here. It's all either no difference or clear positive effects. Now, many of us think that test scores are not a complete or compelling measure of educational success. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that educational attainment, how far you go in school, is much more important than how much you know. So these are the results from a study that I did for the US Congress, an evaluation of the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. And we found that students who participated in this private school choice program graduated from high school at a rate of 91%, which was 21 percentage points higher than the control group students who graduated at a rate of 70%. These are all low-income, disadvantaged District of Columbia students graduating from high school at an amazing 91% rate. There have been 3 other studies conducted on the effect of private school choice on educational attainment, one by me and 2 by other colleagues. They've all confirmed these results, that private school choice has its clearest and largest positive effects on educational attainment. And finally, does participating in choice transform parents? Does the experience of school choice really change their attitudes and dispositions? This is a largely unexplored and unanswered question, and so Dr. Thomas Stewart and I decided to take a crack at it. We tracked 100 families who were participating in the DC Choice Program over 5 years. We found at the outset these families were all disadvantaged educationally, economically, and politically. Very few of the parents said that they'd ever been involved in any political activities at the start of this process. But over the course of the 5-year pilot program that they participated in, we were able to document through focus groups and personal interviews that many of these parents moved from passive clients, passive mere recipients of government programs, to informed consumers of their child's education. And then, at the end of the process, when the program was challenged, it was nearly shut down by the Democratic Congress, these parents rose up en masse and helped rescue the program. They became active citizens. So basically, we recently published a book, The School Choice Journey, where we document this transformative power of school choice, transforming parents from passive consumers to informed clients and to active citizens. Really an amazing transformation. Now, if you follow the mainstream media, you probably don't hear anything about this exciting positive research on school choice. It's generally not covered. If they say anything about the research, they say it's mixed or they cherry pick some negative results. But there are a few exceptions to this, and one very notable one, is a piece that Mary Catherine Ham did in the Daily Caller, and so I am going to finish my presentation by allowing Mary Catherine to talk to you about how research on school choice can have a positive impact in the policy debate.
The House voted last week to reinstate funding for the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, overwhelmingly supported by Republicans and one Democrat. Despite President Obama's promises to do what works on education.
Whoops, darn it. There we go.
Education, whether it's a Republican or a Democratic idea, the administration opposed the reinstatement of the program for these low-income DC students, saying in part, rigorous evaluation over several years demonstrates that the DC program has not yielded improved student achievement by its scholarship recipients compared to other students in DC. The problem is that's not true. Just ask Patrick Wolf. I'll let him introduce himself.
I served as the principal investigator of the research team hired by the U.S. Department of Education to conduct an independent evaluation of the OSP.
That's Dr. Patrick Wolf, the guy Congress told to do a Department of Education study on the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. So what's he got to say?
We know from this study that participating DC students are reading at higher levels as a result of the Opportunity Scholarship Program.
So, reading at higher levels, that's not such a big deal. You got anything else, Dr. Wolf?
Moreover, the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program has proven effective at boosting the outcome that matters most, educational attainment. Using an Opportunity Scholarship increased the likelihood of a student graduating by 21 percentage points, from 70% to 91%.
Say what?
From 70% to 91%.
But he probably can't be sure that's from the scholarship, right?
We are more than 99% confident that access to school choice through the Opportunity Scholarship Program was the reason why OSP students graduated at these much higher rates.
Well, it probably didn't serve at-risk students, like those at low-performing schools.
They graduated at a rate that was 20 percentage points higher as a result of using a scholarship.
But surely graduation rates aren't the most important metric, or a centerpiece of Barack Obama's education policies.
Graduating from high school is an economic imperative.
But really, how impressive are these results anyway?
How impressive are the academic impacts of the OSP? When compared to 13 other experimental studies sponsored by the Department of Education's National Center for Educational Evaluation, the educational attainment and achievement impacts from the OSP rank as the second most impressive to date.
According to the White House, this program is not an effective way to improve student achievement. For the sake of the nation's students, here's hoping all of our public schools become similarly ineffective.
All right. Thank you, Mary Catherine, and thank you all for your attention.
I did want to say we'll have some time for questions at the end, so please make a note of your questions till we've heard from all of our panelists. Ramesh, Ponnuru, please.
Note cards are the technology that I've brought to this event. Old-fashioned that way. I think it's important when we talk about school choice, we make the economic case and we talk about competition and the benefits of how you get more value at lower cost. And we reference the studies, as Dr. Wolf has ably done. But we also have to remember the moral case for school choice. And the moral case for school choice is a very simple one, and it goes like this. Nobody cares more about your children than you do. That's the reason why you should be in charge of making those decisions. We've worked very long and hard as a movement to get a beachhead for school choice in a lot of places. We saw the slide in our last presentation. I'm happy to say we're still making progress. Joshua Bedrick from the Cato Institute recently noted that there are 10 states this year that are considering expanding their educational savings account programs. There are 11 states that are considering starting or expanding scholarship tax credits. So we've got a chance to make some more inroads here. It's not looking quite as optimistic in Congress right now, but I think that we should, as conservatives, be committed to a goal of getting Congress to move on this. Congress can help. There is federal education spending that is supposedly dedicated to helping poor children. That is why we have Title I education funding. That was essentially the reason for the Great Society expansion of the federal role in K-12 education. Well, if we are going to spend this money to help poor kids get an education, how about we actually spend it to help them get an education? Let's let that money follow the children to whatever school that they are going to, whether that be a public school, charter school, parochial school, or private school. The function that is being performed is educating them, and if that function is being performed, it shouldn't matter to the federal government where it's taking place. That is a proposal that had the support of Mitt Romney in the last cycle. It had the support of Eric Cantor last year. It's time for us to at least get a vote on it by the House of Representatives so we can know who we can pressure and try to persuade for future votes and eventually get that into law. But what I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about was not only the opportunities we have to expand school choice, but some of the dangers that we face. And in particular, I think that we have sometimes given short shrift as a movement to the dangers of over-regulation of school choice programs. I don't mean to scant the efforts of people who have gotten these school choice programs where they are. It's taken an enormous amount of work, but it has to be admitted that a lot of those school choice programs are not especially robust. There are all kinds of restrictions on them. The most obvious one, not exactly a regulatory issue, but it's an important one to always keep in mind. Public schools don't actually suffer budgetary consequences for losing students to choice programs. I mean, that's this basic mechanism that we use in actual markets to punish failure, reward success, and discourage the former and encourage the latter. We don't have it in most of these school choice programs. A lot of programs don't allow for-profit enterprises to compete. That's also something that, again, is a departure from the way we usually think about how markets drive value, drive success in most areas of American life. Well, there's a new study out about how more regulated versions of school choice tend to fare compared to less regulated versions by some pointy-headed academics. Actually, it turns out I was preparing this and was planning to cite this before realizing that I was going to be on a panel with Patrick Wolf as one of the co-authors. It's a study put out by the American Enterprise Institute, which is one of the places I hang my hat. And the results were not terribly surprising. When you looked at 3-state school choice programs, they looked at Florida, Louisiana, and Indiana. Florida, which had a less regulatory environment, had better outcomes than Indiana and Louisiana, which had more regulatory environments. And why is that? Well, one very important reason is that private schools don't want to participate as much, as readily, if there are a lot of regulations. It scares them off, it adds to their costs, and it makes them worry that whatever regulations they're currently being asked to comply with, they're going to be asked to comply with more in the future. And that's a serious reason to give pause, because these are groups, it's not that they're all necessarily ideologically hostile to regulation, it's that they want to maintain the edge that gives them their reason for existing in the first place. And if they get regulated to the point where they're just like the public schools, they lose their reason for existing. We've talked also too much about competition and choice without thinking through how that kind of agenda can be used to improve higher education, where, as we heard at the beginning, we're getting some pretty subpar outcomes as well. Higher education, too, needs more competition, more deregulation, and more accountability, not to government, but to students and their parents. One idea along those lines has been introduced by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, and that's breaking up the colleges and universities' oligopoly over accreditation. You can't have a system where the federal government is only going to steer loans to places that are accredited by the existing university system and not think you're going to get the same kind of model and the same kind of results. We need to break up this system so that there are new kinds of institutions that can be put in place. And not only that, but also so that we can prevent the kinds of abuses of the system that I think we are increasingly going to see. And anybody who's followed what's going on with Gordon College and the attempt to deny accreditation to schools because they're on the wrong side of the culture war will understand what I'm talking about. One other point that I would make on this that I think would be helpful. The federal government collects all kinds of data, and if it wanted to, could combine that data so that students and parents would know the economic outcomes for students when they go to college X and they major in discipline X, how many of those kids are employed 5 years out of school, what kind of money are they making. Economics is the reason most kids go to school. It's the reason the federal government subsidizes it. Why don't we actually let the consumers know what the outcomes are going to be? Right now, federal law prohibits combining that information in a way that is useful, even if it is done in a privacy-protective way. That needs to go. But in general, what I would say is that conservatives there's a certain wariness of engaging in the higher education issues at the level of public policy. You know, we're conservatives, we tend to think, what business is that of the federal government? The problem is the federal government has done an enormous amount to shape higher education and to misshape higher education. And if we don't get in the game and start moving towards a more market-based approach, we're going to let it continue to be a program built and subsidizing producers at the expense of consumers, that is, at the expense of the public. Big government in this area has created enormous problems and enormous public anxieties. And what that means is we have a chance, if we engage, to combine good policy and good politics. And if we don't do it, I can guarantee you nobody else is going to. Thank you.
There. Well, it's truly an honor to be on such a distinguished panel today, and I'd like to close our time together in discussion by looking to what entrepreneurship and innovation has brought to education and why we must continue to protect and promote the right conditions for innovation, freedom, and achievement to ultimately thrive. So education, as we know, can be a gateway to more prosperity, to opportunity, and to progress. Our founders firmly knew this. Thomas Jefferson said we need to inform and educate the people because they are our only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. Democracy itself is at stake. Because how can you study the principles of liberty when you can't read? As a country, we're currently, as we just heard, being outperformed internationally while spending $600 billion each year in education. That's more than the national budgets of India, South Korea, Russia, Finland, and Singapore combined. And we outpay and spend more, but get less, with a 40% college graduation rate, and the majority of employers saying it's difficult to find qualified employees. Only 35% of US students are actually proficient in math. Only 43% of students with parents from the highest levels of education are proficient in math. So our low performance rate is not just limited to those in high needs areas anymore. Something we don't often hear about is how even our highest ranking students in math and science are not performing as well as students from comparable backgrounds from around the world. More than 75% of the public give American schools a C or below. Democratic Senator from Colorado, Michael Bennett, said that we do not do a good job of aligning education dollars to education outcomes. So what does innovation and entrepreneurship have to do with education, and how can it impact education? As Michael mentioned, innovation scholar Clay Christensen, who's also a Harvard Business School professor, made this concept up of disruptive innovation. And he notes that the market-leading companies are rarely the ones that invent the future. Path-dependent and established, they often try to preserve the status quo, and that often preserves their own bottom line. Disruptive innovation is the theory of the scrappy underdog, the no-frills startup, coming in from the bottom of the market and moving their way up, and eventually displacing their established competitors. They transform a product that was once very expensive and not very accessible and make it much more affordable and accessible. Innovation then has a very implicit democratizing effect. So what does innovation look like in the education sector? I've had the opportunity from having worked at one of actually the largest foundation that supports school choice in this country, and I've been able to see a lot of these innovations firsthand. There have been a number of policy innovations, for example, as we just heard. Over 40 states have allowed entrepreneurs to come in and create charter schools to compete for students. More than a dozen voucher and tax credit programs are providing students with more access and better services than they could have had before. And we're seeing very positive results. Government professor Paul Peterson at Harvard noted that, and he tracked students from kindergarten all the way through college, and found that 24% of African American voucher recipients were more likely to go to college. They only spent about $4,200 per student over a period of 3 years. That's a huge return on investment. And the key to this theory of change for school choice is the role of parents and the empowerment that they are able to have. Milton Friedman made this observation way back in 1979 when he said that parents generally have better interest in and greater knowledge of their students' or their children's capacities and needs than anyone else. And parents' motives for deciding what's best for their children doesn't have to do with politics or even special interests, but is really premised on what's best for students. So what does innovation look like, apart from the policies level, but at the school level? Well, it's looked like promoting more autonomy and independence for schools. School principals and teachers often complain about how the system they're working in is very top-down and that they're hearing from districts what they should or can't do, which fosters a culture of compliance rather than one of creativity. Innovation for both the district and the schools, then, operationally, means having more control over their budgets, over hiring, and over their curriculum development. Shifting from a top-down to a bottom-up model returns the decisions for what's best for students back to those closest to the classroom. In Utah, for example, contracts have been negotiated to become more performance-based, where vendors receive 50% of funds up front and then only receive the other half after students have actually passed the course. McGraw-Hill, one of the largest publishers in our country, actually announced that they made a performance-based contract with the, Western Governors University for its higher education content. It's a good signal of how textbook publishers might be open to these innovative types of contracts that optimize service provision. The non-consumers of schools, principals, teachers, and students then become consumers who are empowered to hold these vendors more directly accountable for results and on the best and most cost-effective terms. For some more insights, let's look at one subgroup of the student population who are arguably those with the highest need, students with disabilities. Special education is actually a very strong microcosm of what's happening in the education sector writ large. States and local programs actually have checklists of more than 800 federal reporting requirements, a few of which are actually even related to student performance. The compliance requirements are so onerous that former Assistant Secretary for Special Education said that no state is in full compliance. Special education teachers have about 5 hours, or spend 5 hours a week on these administrative paperwork. They spend more time on paperwork than actually on, spending time with parents or even with students or what's education related. There's even a federal policy that mandates increased spending from year to year without any connection to student results. It's even more complicated for charter schools because a lot of these complex policies predate the creation of charter schools. So it led to a lot of confusion over charter responsibilities and even the exclusion of charters being able to have access to district services. Yet even in the midst of this compliance-laden climate, there have been compelling stories. And I'd like to end with two really case studies or stories about some high-performing charter schools. The first one is Cheryl Stockwell Academy in Michigan. It was founded in 1996 with the goal of reducing early learning failure and ultimately decreasing the number of students identified for special education. After years of working with administrators and teachers, the founders, Chuck and Shelley Stockwell, became disillusioned. Their concerns were only confirmed after their own daughter, Cheryl, was diagnosed with a brain tumor, which affected her learning abilities. Dissatisfied with her own educational experience, they decided to open up their own charter school and named it after their daughter, Cheryl, who then passed away in 2001. Their school believes that early intervention and excellent teaching can prevent many students from even being diagnosed as having a disability, instead allowing students to learn at their own pace. While most schools often label 12 to even 15% of students as disabled, this school only has 8% of students who qualify for special education. The founder, Chuck Stockwell, said, "We assess and intervene, assess and intervene, and assess and intervene. Intervention is based on the theory of what's going on." And their commitment to this mission and service has evidenced solid results. Their students with disabilities gain 1.2 grade learnings per year. That means more than 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. Similarly, another high needs group of students in our schools are Hispanic students. Hispanic students have the highest dropout rate in our country, with the smallest proportion who hold bachelor's degrees. Only about 13% of Hispanic young adults hold bachelor degrees. Only 17% test as proficient. But some schools are beating the odds. At Esperanza Charter Academy in Philadelphia, the poverty rate for students there is 82%. They have a 17% English language learner population, and about 92% of students are Hispanic. But they have seen great success, with 92% of students being accepted into college and a wait list to be accepted into their school of 1,000 students per year. Esperanza's academic success has come from a school culture based on faith, excellence, and integrity. They value trust, transparency, and being authentic. Their staff quote Matthew 25:40, which gives a charge to serve the least of these. That is their motivation. Esperanza believes that schools are more than bricks and mortar, but largely consist of relationships between teachers and parents, teachers and administrators, and students and teachers. Esperanza in Spanish means hope, and that's just what school entrepreneurs in Philadelphia are giving these students. These are just two of the many charter school examples that have created an environment where innovation can thrive and improve the academic performance of all students. Many of their best practices have been they've done what's best for their students, actually. School choice enables very unique schools to serve unique students. But none of these innovations came easily, overnight, or as a result of mandates prescribed from experts from afar. Rather, these breakthroughs have emerged because these entrepreneurs have been relentless in their study of what is actually happening, paying attention to the local knowledge of parents and teachers and students, incorporating that feedback then back into their practice. Charter schools then present an important opportunity for us to accelerate change and incubate innovation and customize education to meet the needs of all students. I'd like to close in with a quote from sort of the Da Vinci of our age, Steve Jobs, who said, "I used to think when I was in my 20s that technology was a solution to most of the world's problems, but unfortunately, that just isn't the case. We need to attack these things at the root, which is people and how much freedom we give people and the competition that will attract the best people." From Steve Jobs to Peter Thiel to Elon Musk, our culture is starting to see the entrepreneur as a new kind of hero, a visionary who not only creates a new business or product, but a difference in how we live and work. Creative minds who are leading a movement with new solutions and models. They're able to dream boldly, build patiently, and experiment rigorously. America has been the leader in education and innovation and can once again lead the world. if we preserve the independence of these entrepreneurs to brave the experiment, lead, and dream. Thank you.
We have about 10 minutes for questions. Let me ask that all questions be questions and that they address the topic of the panel, and in consideration of one another, keep them focused and short, please.
I'd like to know if, I'm a special education teacher in the city of Rochester, New York, and I'd like to know if the vouchers you're talking about were given to students, given to special ed students with an equal amount of choice.
Sure. So there are 12 of the 41 voucher programs, there are private school choice programs that exist, are limited exclusively to students with disabilities. You have to have an IEP or you don't qualify for the program. So those programs are really focused, concentrated, targeted on kids with disabilities. The means-tested choice voucher programs, there are some participants who have IEPs, but because you only get a flat amount, you don't get an extra supplement if you have a disability, and the amount is significantly less than what's spent in the public schools. The participation rates of kids with disabilities are lower in those programs than their representation in the population. So what you have is you have a mix. You have some private school choice programs that are 100% kids with disabilities, and then you have other private school choice programs where 2 to 6% of the participants have disabilities.
So they're stuck in the majority, from what you're saying, the majority of kids who are classified are left in the public school.
When there are means-tested programs that don't provide additional funding for kids with disabilities, then most of the kids with disabilities stay in the public schools. But obviously, when they're targeted exclusively to kids with disabilities, they're the ones who are participating. If you sort of total it all up, over 20% of the students currently receiving private school choice scholarships or vouchers in the United States have an IEP. So it's actually, that's a greater representation than their share of the student population.
Other questions? Let me explain. We've all contributed some points to remember and some things to read and other kinds of takeaways. So I'm going to distract you slightly with a little bit of a slideshow as we're doing Q&A. And once again, if people would like copies of our PowerPoints, just leave an email address with us and we'll get them out to you. See, I think I see one in the back, please.
Yes, I'm wondering what should be done with public schools that are left after the programs are implemented so that students at those schools can also receive quality education?
Sure, there's been some research on that, that basically private or public schools tend to take certain steps when they're faced with competition from private school choice. One is they tend to communicate more and more effectively with parents. So, I mean, absent private school choice, they operate kind of like a standard monopoly. They take the students in and work on educating them, but they don't feel like they have to communicate much with parents in terms of what they're offering and things like that. That changes when they face competition from private school choice, so there's more communication with parents. In general, they advertise more, and they also tend to adopt specific programs that will make them distinctive. Instead of just offering like a general education sort of program, they're more likely to initiate new programs in response to competition from private schools. So that's generally what they do, is those three things: advertise more, communicate more with parents, and start new programs.
Please.
Hi, so I heard the term expert from afar, and we realize here that that's obviously not the answer, but especially at the federal level with things such as Common Core, that's being given choice by most of the people on the left. So what would you say to people who think bigger government is the answer to fix our education system?
think most of our comments have showed that what we currently have right now isn't working, and so that we should be looking to other alternatives and looking to support what actually works and what drives student improvement.
I was going to add, to emphasize a point that Ramesh made. We have a group of regional accrediting associations empowered by the federal government through the Higher Education Act, which, by the way, is up for reauthorization, please note. They have access to the enormous amount of Title IV funding, all student assistance, federal student assistance. Have they improved the quality of higher education? We have numerous institutions with graduation rates in the single digits, a great number that are way below a third. Look to your right, look to your left. Only one of you will actually get a degree from this institution. There has been no real focus on academic outcomes. This is all coming from a group of, quote, experts empowered by the federal government. And it is time, as Ramesh mentioned, for this system to be completely overhauled, not tweaked, but overhauled. Question?
So, in the spirit of a complete overhaul, are there any benefits to public schools in their current incarnation? And if not, as you're saying, is it politically possible to move to a system where our schools are completely privatized so that we have a free market educational system? What are the political realities of that? And is it attainable?
Well, if I can figure out how to use this. As I said, technology is not my thing. You know, I think there are a lot of public schools in this country that do a fine job of educating kids. Sometimes when we talk about public schools and private schools, we ignore the extent to which a lot of Americans have choice. They pick their schools by picking where they live. We just have a sort of perverse system where, you know, public schools are not like public parks where anybody can come and use them. You've got to live in the right zip code. And when people have the means to exercise choice, they tend to find public schools that they're happy with. Now, there are ways we can improve those, but we certainly shouldn't make it sound as though we as conservatives believe that, you know, all public schools need to be closed tomorrow. We do, I think, need to stand for a more competitive model where choice is given to people who are currently locked out from having it, and that'll help American education across the board.
Just to follow up, if we are talking about a free market scenario, though, if these charter schools are really more superior to their public counterparts, the market will drive them out of business, right? So is that a desirable outcome at the end of the day? If you choose the free market to do it, that the free market takes care of the job.
Let me take on that one. So private school choice is much more common in many countries around the world than it is in the United States. In the Netherlands, for example, they have had government-funded private school choice for over 100 years. And currently, so that's a mature market. And the private schools get the same amount of money as the public schools do. And basically what they have is about 60% of Dutch students enroll in private schools and 40% enroll in government-run public schools. So if there's a market equilibrium out there, you know, we might suspect that the Netherlands has it and it's 60-40. In other countries, they aren't quite as generous with the private school voucher, and oftentimes, you know, it's more of 2/3 still in the public school and 1/3 in the private schools. But I'll just echo what Ramesh said, is that many public schools do perfectly fine, do well with the students they have. The problem is not public schooling per se. The problem is parents not having options. So if they're stuck in a situation where they have a generally underperforming public school, or they have a public school that just isn't right for their kid, they don't have any options. And so I think that's what everyone's talking about, is just giving parents more options, but not driving the public school system out of business.
I think we have a last time for only one more question. You've been a fantastic audience. And let me take that question in the back. You've been waiting a long time.
I'm from Breakfast City. I was just wondering, before
Sure. Yeah, I'll say a few things about that. It's kind of interesting, just historically and culturally, because you started it with a historical and cultural sort of reference. There was a point in time in the development of sort of the public school teacher movement, the unionization movement, where the teachers' unions basically made a decision that they were going to emphasize smaller class sizes much more so than higher teacher pay. And of course, from an organizational standpoint, that made sense. They'd rather have more members than fewer members who were paid more. And so they sort of doubled down on class size reduction and more teachers, and shied away from teacher merit pay, rockstar teacher pay, things like that, just requiring a higher level of education and preparation for teachers and then paying them more. So that was an organizational and political decision that the unions pursued, and that got us to where we are now. But there are a lot of proposals to basically identify the most effective teachers in the public school system, give them twice as many students, and pay them twice as much. But collective bargaining agreements won't allow that.
Yeah, a
Well,
seniority.
with that, I think I'm just going to have to say that we have used up our time. Thank you so much for being here. It speaks so well for CPAC that people have, like James Madison would have wanted, focused on education.
All right. Well done, Michael.